I'm joined by Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida's 19th Congressional District. We're going to talk about a wide ranging issues, but I first want to preface by welcoming the congressman who's a freshman to speak with me. It's an honor, and I'm really grateful we can chat about some hot topics today. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
Of course. Talk about Florida's 19th Congressional District and what prompted you to run for office.
Well, the 19th district in Florida is mostly Fort Myers, Naples, and Marco Island. A lot of different cities. We're a coastal region here in Southwest Florida. Ton of beaches. It's really a great place. We actually have somewhat become a retiree destination. So a lot of people who have done well in their lives from all across the country tend to come here and retire here and just live out their years. I mean, it's great weather, great beaches, really good food. It's just a really nice area. I think we're constantly in like the top 10 of nicest places to live in the United States. So really proud of that. I decided to run for Congress really because I think that our area is also very conservative, and one of the things that's necessary is that we have a conservative represent the area in Congress. And when the race came open, I really looked at it and really thought it through, and thought I would actually be able to represent the area in a very good way, in a very dynamic way. Always putting the Constitution first, making sure that we do everything we can to limit government, its size and its scope, and frankly, just to make sure that the federal government only does the things that it's supposed to do, no more, no less. Actually, do them efficiently and actually do them well. And I think that that's what most people actually want to see out of their government. I got involved politically 10 years ago. I mean, before that, I was apolitical, like most people are in the United States. Before then, I was just living my life, working in my career, raising my family, and just being a normal citizen. But I guess politics found me, and 10 years later, here I am.
Yes, and I actually first heard about you from Nicholas Tomboulides a few years ago, and he told me to keep a tab on you and say this guy's going to go places. And it's really cool now to see that kind of prediction come to fruition. I think he was onto something with respect to your rising profile. And Florida's 19th, I don't know if you partake in this directly, but it's actually a really great fishing destination. You probably have heard this from constituents and maybe some of your neighbors, but it's actually a really world-class fishing destination, one of my favorites. It's not really related to what you just talked about, but it really is kind of an economic hub for fishing. And also, I remember seeing something of yours early on in your candidacy, how you will talk about and kind of focus on water quality issues, even though it's a little bit away from your committee assignments. But is that something that has crossed your mind as well with representing the 19th district?
Of course. It's one of those things where water quality for us is essential. Like I said, we are a coastal region. So obviously, poor water quality is going to affect us in so many ways. Obviously, our fishing captains here that exist, and we have so many of them. Because you are right, fishing is a really big deal here in our area. I'm not a fishing guy myself. I don't fish too much, but I know a lot of people who do, and it's really essential in our area. Not just quality of life reasons, but a lot of people just love to just fish, get out there, and we do some commercial fishing, although not too much in our area. The big thing I think is important with respect to water quality is the Everglades water flow system. That really, the heart of it is Lake Okeechobee, which is east of my congressional district. Is something where it was actually created. The current system was created by the federal government in the late 40s, in the early 50s, and that was in response to two hurricanes, which created massive flooding all over South Florida, and 3,000 to 4,000 people lost their lives in the flooding. And so that pushed the federal government to create an actual water distribution system in South Florida, all of South Florida. And that's the Lake Okeechobee flow system. The issue we're having, and which has really happened, is that we still have cattle farming, a lot of farming around the lake and around the rivers going into the lake, feeding into the lake. But the other issue is that nobody ever conceived that 15 million people would live south of I-4. That now happens. And so what's required is actually following the SERP plan. It's a series of 67 projects that ecologists and scientists came together and said, this is the plan we should be following. It was actually passed by Congress in 2000. The problem is Congress never funded it, and the state of Florida never funded it until recently. Governor Rick Scott, when he was governor at the time, just finally said enough is enough. We're just going to start doing projects on our own as a state. Governor DeSantis has stepped up to the plate and has been very committed to Everglades restoration and water quality projects. President Trump was the first president who actually took the Everglades system seriously and actually funded it. And so now the issue is just continuing the funding. There's not a lot of magic bullets when it comes to water quality. It's making sure that we have the right projects in place, that we do the work, that we do it timely so that we can have clean water in all parts of Florida, whether it's clean salt water here on the coastline or clean fresh water in the Okeechobee Flowway system and down into the Everglades.
That's indeed true. It's actually a very good comprehensive view, because friends that I talk to in the fishing industry and kind of conservation at large, and even in politics, say that that really is a kind of convoluted, kind of multi-prong issue, because a lot of farmers are kind of shafted and given the blame. And then obviously you have the other problem, more so with just the infusion of people moving to Florida and how that demand can't really match up with some of the quality issues. And kind of speaking to the larger environmental issue, with some of the stuff you've been seeing, and I think Republicans have done a better job of embracing the fact that you can have environmental stewardship, but also you can also have job creation in a safe, responsible manner. Do you worry that that philosophy is going to be chipped away at, not necessarily in the Republican Party, but kind of writ large nationally?
No, I don't think so. I think that, as a party, taking care of our environment is just as important as taking care of our economy. They really go hand in hand. And I think that if we're just prudent and do the things that need to be done and we're consistent, we'll be able to get the job done for everybody. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is somehow farmers are opposed to water quality. That's not true. Farmers, they need clean sources of water probably more than people do, because of the amount of water that goes into the crops that they deliver, so on and so forth. And, as a byproduct of that, that helps all of us, because, we do grow a lot of food in Florida, especially in the Lake Okeechobee agriculture area. We serve millions of people in that part of our state when it comes to fresh fruit and vegetables, and sugar and other products. And in north of the lake, we have cattle farms, and that feeds obviously so many people with beef and pork and chickens and things of that nature. And so it is important that we actually take care of our water issues. We can't kick the can down the road. At the same time, we can't get caught up in, this radical environmentalism that also does take place. And, when you have a chance to talk to them, when the cameras are off and actually get into details, it's just that they have an agenda that they're trying to promote and they're trying to pursue. And that agenda is really a step beyond the type of conservation mindset and environmental stewardship that does need to take place.
Yeah, I think that's a view that's starting to be communicated more, especially in Republican politics, and especially as we see nationally, kind of that shift away kind of to more preservationist thinking kind of federally and whatnot. And I know that this is a really big issue, so I appreciate you addressing that for me and communicating that to me. And actually recently, you just delivered one of your very first floor speeches in Congress about the $1.9 trillion coronavirus bill. And you had a lot to say about that. And you're very passionate about financial issues, banking, small business. You just got appointed to oversight, budget, and small business. So drawing from your speech and then your interest in obviously tackling these issues, do you think Republicans are also going to revert back to tackling the debt and deficit more seriously? Because we know that kind of rhetoric shifts here and there.
Yes, we need to. Let's just be very clear about it. We're now a little over, getting close to 28 trillion in debt. That's where we are. The Social Security and Medicare, those programs have real problems that need to be addressed, or they're going to really be a financial anchor on everybody. Congress always seems to find a way to ignore them and not actually deal with it. But we're going to have to. There's really no choice about that. It's just a matter of time, and the clock definitely is ticking. I think that, fiscal issues and our response to them is something that is going to become more and more a part of, the party's view. It's definitely a part of mine, but there's a way that you can actually talk about them. You see, I think it's responsible for people to understand the importance of us getting our fiscal house in order, while also being able to make sure that we take care of and do the things that government should be doing. Like I said at the open, there are certain things that government should do and do them well. The other stuff, we're either going to have to reform, remove, push back down to state levels or even the local levels, because that's the appropriate place that it should be. And that's one of the main reasons I'm opposed to the stimulus package or the COVID package or whatever you want to call it that Joe Biden's putting forward, because it just reeks of fiscal irresponsibility. There's still $1 trillion of funding from last year that has not been spent yet. $1 trillion hasn't been spent. He wants to add another two. And so then they can basically say that, look, we stepped up to the plate and we addressed COVID. The truth of the matter is that through 1 million vaccinations a day, which are happening in the United States and have been happening in the United States, even before the president got inaugurated, when you look at that, when you look at the fact that you have states like us here in Florida that have reopened in a responsible way, allowing business owners to take responsibility for how they care for their employees and their customers, while at the same time being able to run their business. What we've seen in Florida is that our tax base has actually recovered, that our economy has actually recovered. We still struggle because hospitality jobs are an important part of our state, and hospitality is the area that struggled the most due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But that being the case, if you really want to if you want to provide help, then you're very targeted in the way you approach these things. The Biden plan is not targeted. It's just throwing money out the door, hopefully to get something to stick. There are bailouts for state and local governments who have not done a good job managing themselves through the pandemic. And it's going to create a lot of issues in our country. We just can't continue to spend like we've been spending. And even though we have an emergency, that's not a license just to spend money. That's an excuse. And I think it's important that we get our arms around that. And that's something I'm definitely going to be doing and talking about.
Despite calls for unity, we're hearing from President Biden and some of your Democrat colleagues that they want to push that they're open to it. But with budget negotiations and relief negotiations, it doesn't seem like that's taking place. Call for unity overstated? Is it kind of falling on deaf ears? Are they going to be bringing Republicans like yourself to the table to discuss how to tackle this issue, or they're just uninterested and they want to appease perhaps a small minority but loud minority in their base?
I actually don't think it's a bad idea to call for unity. I think as a country, we need that. I mean, we cannot, in my opinion, be a nation divided. A house divided upon itself can't stand. That's the truth. But I will tell you, I don't really see it coming out of the White House right now, or even from the Democrats in Congress. What they're doing right now is taking a assess of the political reality that they have the votes, and they're just going to push their agenda regardless of what Republicans think. Even in DC right now, we're not really doing much work. We've been focused on, obviously, the Electoral College and the events on January 6th. Then it moved to impeachment votes. Then it moved to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, and also this shell bill that they just basically pushed through with no input from any committee. Not even Democrats had an opportunity to have input on this. This came directly from Nancy Pelosi's office to the House floor, and we were voting on it. So there's been no input on anything. And so what we're seeing through actions, not by words, but with actions, is that they have no interest in dealing with Republicans. I know that you had several Republican senators who were at the White House with the president last week. And what came out of that meeting is that, the Republican senators, who got invited, even they weren't on board with Joe Biden's plan. So what did Joe Biden come out and say? Well, I talked to him, but it doesn't look like we're on the same page, and I'm not negotiating. So we're just going ahead. And that's what we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. right now. And so I think you couple that with a lot of the cancel culture stuff that's going on, which, Democrats now are all supportive of when it comes to language and rhetoric. I think what you're starting to see is that they're really interested in just having their way, and unity can come after that, or the unity that they seek happens if Republicans just go along with what they want to do. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Some of the rhetoric we're seeing from the Democrat Party is that the Republican Party is in shambles. They're completely lost and dejected. They're full of extremists. Since you have a bird's eye view into kind of congressional affairs, is that the case? I understand there were obviously efforts to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene. Obviously, there was the vote to try to remove Liz Cheney. Those are certainly hyped up. I think a lot of people can agree. But do you think the Republican Party is more disunited or united despite that? And can they overcome those challenges with some of the divisions?
No, we're a united party. I don't agree with that at all. I think, look, it's okay to have disagreements. There was a disagreement on Liz Cheney. There's a disagreement on Marjorie Taylor Greene. Disagreements don't make you dysfunctional. And I think, in politics, the thing I've always hated is that somehow if there's a disagreement, that means there's dysfunction. That's not true. It's healthy to have disagreements. It's healthy to have debates. We're doing that in our party, but guess what? The Democrats were doing it in their party after Hillary Clinton lost, and there were deep disagreements about what kind of party they were going to be. We're having those disagreements now as a party, but I think what you're going to see is we're going to be, in the words of Ronald Reagan, we're going to be the revitalized second party. We're going to be a party that's going to get back to basics, focus on the things that are important to the American people, but also understanding, the influences and the positive influences and input that President Trump brought to our party. Namely, do what you said you were going to do. Don't be afraid of standing for what you believe in. Don't worry about what the media thinks. They're not your friends anyway. And I think those are the type of impulses in our party that you're going to start seeing more and more from people like myself and some of my other colleagues who are either new to Congress or who are frankly just tired and don't want to go back to the old ways. They want to have a revitalized party that's going to be outspoken, that's going to actually stand on principle, and is actually going to do it when you have the votes to do it.
Taking something from entrepreneurship and the business world, politics got a lot of creative disruption in the last few years. And do you kind of foresee that happening with kind of the newer crop of Republicans coming in, especially others part of the 117th class, which was historic by every objective measure, a lot of women, more diverse Republicans. Do you kind of see that creative disruption taking hold even more and producing successful results with more members like yourself coming into the fold?
I do. I think, look, if you take a step back, and it's not just, I'll be honest, it's not just about Republicans. I think politics in general has been hit with disruptors. And I think it's for the better. I don't think it's for the worse. I mean, the first real disruptor in politics actually was Barack Obama. He was a disruptor. Going back to 2007, it was not his time to run for president. It was Hillary Clinton's time, and everybody was just supposed to stand aside and coronate her. So he was a disruptor. Donald Trump was a disruptor. You look at somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who was a mayor in Indiana and, ran for the presidency on the Democrat side of the aisle. And for a mayor, jumping into a presidential race was actually quite successful. And I think it's important to acknowledge and understand that social media, when you're not trying to, silence people, but social media writ large has been very positive for our politics. Yeah, it can be messy. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with, like I said, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of messiness. There's nothing wrong with disagreements. That actually helps clarify arguments. You need more speech, not less speech. I think we need more disruptors, not less disruptors. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see more of this to come. It's not going away, because at the true core of it is that you have voters, you have Americans who are looking for people to represent them, who are just going to do what they said they were going to do. Period, and be committed to it, and not get caught up in the games of the Beltway, not get caught up with the games of how do I get on TV or how do I raise more money, how do I get a leadership post. Like, did you come here to do a job? Are you committed to the job? Are you going to be outspoken about it and do what you can to see it happen? And I think that's what voters want. And I think, in our current world today, where social media has helped us progress, where people can really go from 0 to 60 in the political world because of their ideas and their stature and their story, I think you're going to see more disruptors, not less. And I think that's a good thing for our politics.
Yeah, it's inevitable to see it across different economic sectors. It had to come to politics some way or another. And I think people associate disruption with bad, but sometimes you do need it to innovate, to refine, to improve and become better. And I think in politics, it can be argued that creative disruption is needed so more people feel that they have representation in Congress and Senate, federally, et cetera.
But to that point, I'll tell you right now, I'd ask people, would they prefer to go back to Blockbuster Video, or do they like Netflix and Amazon Prime? I know I do. I might disagree with Amazon right now on some of their decisions from a corporate structure, but I don't want to go back to driving to some store and being charged $2 because I didn't rewind the videotape. I don't want to do that. And I don't think people want to do that either. And that's why I think this progression you're seeing is not going to stop. It's going to continue.
In terms of some of your priorities in the committees that you were appointed to, what bills can we anticipate from you going forward? I know you are likely going to have some involvement with the GameStop Robinhood issue. Is there anything else that we should be aware of? Perhaps any efforts to kind of bring down any kind of caustic measures in COVID relief. So what are you focusing on in the three committees you're a part of?
Well, actually, right now we're doing a real evaluation of that. I mean, some of the big ticket items I always support are term limits. I'm actually a co-introducer or whatever they call it, talking about, however they phrase it in Washington speak, of the term limits bill. Big supporter of that. I'm a believer in a flat tax or a fair tax. I'll support either one of those measures. I think tax simplicity is important. It helps everybody just kind of know how to operate on the same playing field. So the simpler, the better. That's my philosophy. I think that what you're also going to see coming out of me, we're going to focus something on financial technology, finding ways to help your true small businesses, your micro businesses, be able to access capital. What we've seen during the pandemic is that because of Dodd-Frank, which was one of the last pieces of financial monstrosity legislation that came through Capitol Hill, it actually has destroyed community banks. There are less community banks in the country today than there were a decade ago because of the regulatory and compliance associated with Dodd-Frank. And so because you have less community banks, your smaller businesses don't have as many financial relationships that they need access to in order to survive something like a pandemic shutdown. And so, one of the things I want to look at is leveraging technology to help those small businesses have those financial relationships to be able to access capital in the times when they need it. And even in the times that they want to expand, I think that's important. Immigration, of course, in light of what the president is doing with his executive orders, it's going to be very tough for Republicans to put forward a immigration measure. But I do think that when we take back the House and take back the White House, and these things can be cyclical, when we do get the majorities back, we have to actually move forward on immigration reform. And let's do it once and for all and get a clear rubric of how this is going to work for the American people. Those are some of the things that I think about. There are going to be more. But the last thing I will tell you is I'm also thinking about ways to not just do things just to do them. Like I said in the opening, government should do a few things, do them efficiently, and do them well. The rest needs to be left to the states and to the people.
Yeah, and I think more people are going to recognize that perhaps as they see this new administration move forward, especially at rapid speed with what they're doing. I think many people are starting to have a little bit of buyer's remorse if they had voted for President Biden. We see Richard Trumka talking to Axios saying that, well, I didn't anticipate him killing Keystone Pipeline and not having a plan to kind of recoup for those jobs. So perhaps maybe some of our friends on the other side of the aisle and in the middle of the spectrum too may see that as well. And has the gig economy been on your mind? I know that's more so in House labor, but that's something that's starting to be discussed at length. And it kind of relates to small business too, because a lot of these people aspire to become business owners, to be sole proprietors, to be LLC owners. But is that something that you think you and the Republican caucus will tackle and maybe get some Democrats to support?
The only thing I'm concerned about is what Washington thinks about when it says it's time to tackle something. And this is the vanity of elected officials sometimes, that we think that somehow because, we have a title and we have a badge we walk around on our lapel all the time, that somehow that means we're smarter than the American people. I actually don't agree with that. I think the gig economy is something that needs to evolve and needs to grow on its own with little interference from Washington. So if there's anything that Republicans are doing, it should be to make sure that people have the freedom to go ahead and operate in these various businesses, organize themselves, that red tape from Washington is not in their way for being able to do that so that they can pursue their happiness. That's what I think probably at a maximum, that's probably what we should be doing with respect to the gig economy. I mean, we have to understand that the genius of the American people when they operate, in harmony and peace and commerce or whatever it might be, is far more knowledgeable than anything we can cook up on Capitol Hill. And I think it's important that the members have enough restraint when it comes to legislation to understand that fact.
Yeah, and that will come in the form of the PRO Act, which was just reintroduced, concerning if Democrats do proceed with this. And I know the president has said that he wants to do that, but that's an element of small business I think people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe something I want to conclude with, about Florida. I saw that you were a transplant to Florida many years ago, and a lot of people are moving to Florida, obviously, like you mentioned, for the sunshine, no state income tax, better living quality, obviously, the governor and some of the elected officials. But do you think we're going to see that trend continue? And even with kind of the high density concerns that you were alluding to and talking about, do you think Florida could still be economically attractive to people fleeing these blue states, or maybe these states where they feel kind of constricted and they can't do anything?
I do. I think Florida right now, we're what California used to be. I used to say that, California was the future. So California will the country will go the way of California. Actually, I think the country's going to go the way of Florida now. We have had sustained political leadership out of Tallahassee. I served in the Florida legislature for 4 years myself. We've had sustained leadership that wants to do one very important thing, and that's just leave people alone and let them organize themselves. We just want to provide a general framework upon which everybody gets to organize and operate. Sounds simple, but it actually works. And, we're the blueprint for that. I could tell you right now, I've talked to so many people, who sent me messages on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, or Twitter, and they're just like, yeah, I'm moving to Florida because I've been meaning to move to Florida. I need to move there. I need to get there because what's going on in Illinois or New Jersey or Connecticut or New York is just crazy. And they want to get away from it. And I think that, as a former New Yorker, I'm really upset what's happened to my city. I think Bill de Blasio is a moron personally. I think he's one of the worst mayors our city has ever had, probably the worst mayor our city has ever had. And that's why the place is depopulating. And I think that that's going to continue before it reverses.
Where can people follow you, your musings, your congressional work, Congressman Donalds?
Just at Byron Donalds on Twitter, at Byron Donalds on Instagram. I think it's facebook.com/Byron Donalds. Everything's pretty simple. Everything's at Byron Donalds. I know. Oh, the official Twitter handle is at Rep Donalds Press. That's the official one, but at Byron Donalds is good enough. You can find me there.
Excellent. This has been very wide-ranging and very informative. I really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to speak with me. I hope we can interface sometime again in the future. So thank you again, Congressman Donalds, for speaking with me.
All right, listen, thanks so much. It was awesome. Can't wait to do it again.